We'd like to take this opportunity once again to welcome you to Mount Zion Church of Christ and hope that you'll come back and be with us again.
Good morning. The first song this morning will be page 447. Start going in. Savior, lead us, I say. Gently lead me on the way. I am by thy side. I live in thy love abide. Lead me, Savior, lead me lest I stray. Gently down the stream of time, lead me, Savior, all the way. Thou the refuge of my soul, when my stormy billows roll, I am safe when thou art nigh. All my hopes on thee rely. Lead me, Savior, lead me lest I stray. Gently down the stream of time, lead me, Savior, all the way. Savior, lead me that path, where the song of life is to the land of endless where all things are like the waves of Savior, lead me lest I stray. Gently down the stream of time, lead me, Savior, all the way. Next song this morning will be page 303. After this, we'll have Steve Crosland to lead us in prayer and Greg Barrett led our scripture. I've prepared when the saints abide, just over in the glory land, and I walk to thee by my Savior's side, just over in the glory land, just over in the glory land. I'll
Lord's Day. Another opportunity to come into your house and sing your songs and pray and hear another portion of your word. Father, we pray our blessing this morning on the sick of our congregation and our families that's been mentioned. We pray that you would be with all of those. Lay thy healing hands upon them and give them all their support and help if you thy will. Father, we ask that you continue to comfort those that's lost loved ones as only you can do, and we pray that come to you. We're so thankful to you, Father, for Mr. King had enough improvement that they could back with us this morning for another worship service. And we're so thankful and we pray that it is freedom we can continue and you'll be able to continue to be back and be with us every day. And Miss Mary, we pray that her problems, that you be with her and any issues she might have. Father, we continue to pray for our country. We pray that our leaders will come together and unite and truly make America great again, make it a moral, sound nation, Christian nation, and just have brotherly love scattered all through the United States. Father, we pray that you be with Brother David this morning as he comes before us with another lesson. We pray that you give him the knowledge and the ready recollection of what he wants to talk to us about, and having Father to be able to help him get through it and break it down for all of us and everything. Father, we pray this morning, and if there's anyone that's not named by name, that maybe Brother David will say something that might help you respond this morning, or at least plant a seed that will grow and then come back. Father, if it's somebody here that's named by name was buried away, we pray that they can come back and get the blessings and be with the church and get the word of the church and live their life the way they should. Father, we're so thankful for all the visitors this morning, and we pray that they'll continue to return to Mount Zion if they're looking for a church home. We'd be glad to have them. As we go through the day, we pray that you keep us all safe. We pray that much good will come out of this service. We ask that you do forgive us of our sins. In Jesus Christ's name we pray.
Scripture reading today comes from Ephesians 5:23 through 27. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish.
Next song this morning will be page 638, after the all screen. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair. When the saved elect shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is all yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is all when glory of His resurrection share. When His chosen ones shall gather to their home beyond the sky, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of His wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there.
Somebody dropped their pencil. Didn't it? Ring, okay. Good to have everybody here this morning. Glad that you are here and got a good number. And happy to have all the ones that are visiting with us today. And among our visitors, of course, is my nephew, Brandon, and Katrina, and the boys from up at Three Forks. And I didn't know they were coming. I knew they were coming. I didn't know they was going to be today. But I talked to him not too long ago, and he said that they were coming one Sunday. So I'm glad it's today. I'm glad they got here today. Got to tell you a little something on our family. There's never ending a plethora of stories about it, but everybody remembers that, especially those of you that are older, remember Brandon's daddy, Philip, my brother, and growing up, two boys in the same household couldn't have been any different, just like Jacob and Esau, just like Brian and Ethan. You know, they two just as far apart as they could get on philosophy and values and everything else. But several years ago, back before they built the new building, I had a meeting up there, and Connie Mills was the normal song leader. And of course, Brother Connie is dead now, been dead for a long time, but the meeting started on Sunday morning. And what's your name? Brandon, he was just a little boy at this time when this happened. But anyway, that morning when we got to church, and Connie turned up sick, and Nola May, his wife, people that I have known for so many of you know both of them, or knew both of them. She said, he's sick and he's not going to be here today. So they got scratching around to see who's going to be the song leader for that morning. And so Eugene Coos was one of the elders, and he said, why don't you just lead the singing this morning? And I said, well, you sure you want me to do that and preach too? And he said, yeah, go ahead. Just go ahead. Be fine. And had a good crowd that morning, so I led the singing. And then I had Sunday school class and then preached. Well, when we came out, I was standing by the door as I always do, shaking hands, and Philip had come back there and stood by me while all this was going on. And Eugene Coop came out, and of course he and Philip were the greatest of friends and everything. But if you knew us and our family, Philip was mechanically, electronically, anything like that, he was a whiz at it. He could do anything, and I couldn't do nothing. I never, my talents, never, what if you call them talents, never did go in that direction. I couldn't fix nothing. Still can't. I ain't grown a bit in all that time. But anyway, Eugene, he wanted to gig Philip a little bit, and he said, Philip said, there's something I don't understand. He was raised in the same family, same father, same mother, went to the same church. He said, did David get all the talent? He can lead the singing, he can lead prayer, he can wait on the Lord's table, he can teach class, he can preach, and you know, you don't do none of that stuff. You can't. Philip said, well, I can zip my own britches up. As if I couldn't, you know, because I didn't have that much talent, you know, electronically, mechanically. Philip, he always had an answer, and he had one quick. But I'll tell you a little something about Brandon. Growing up, he was exposed to a lot of mechanical talent, electronic talent. Of course, that's how he makes his living this day and time. But he got some talents that his daddy didn't have on speaking. And one of these days when I can slip off, when I know that he's going to be speaking, I'm going to go up there and hear the other part of his talent. And I'm so proud of him and of Katrina and the boys, and know that they're leading their Christian lives in the direction that it ought to go. And that's more important to me than anything else. I don't care how talented he is. That's the direction that I want him to go in. What I want to talk to you about for a few minutes this morning is about the perfect church. And we are guilty, especially preachers more than anybody else, we're guilty of misusing and misunderstanding the word perfect. We leave the impression with people that perfect means flawless, without error, without fault. And that's not the way that the word perfect is used, or was used at the time that the Bible was translated from Greek into English. That's not what it meant at all. It meant complete. It meant total. It meant whole. That's what perfect really meant. And so you're going to find a number of times that the word perfect is used, and you think that here, if it's speaking about a person, you're going to say, well, I don't understand how that God would describe somebody as being perfect. Let me give you a few examples right here to sort of set the stage for us. Let's listen to this one. Genesis chapter 6 and verse 9. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generation. Noah was perfect? Well, we could take issue with that if we use perfect in that way, because after the flood was over and he got off the boat, he planted him a vineyard, made the grapes into wine, got drunk and took all his clothes off. That's a perfect man that does that? I don't think so. Listen to this one, Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. God told Abraham, "Be thou perfect and walk before me." Abraham perfect? Well, I would say he's a mighty fine old fella, but I don't know about being perfect, because he lied and told King Abimelech that Sarah was his sister. That ain't perfect. Lying ain't perfect. And what about this one? Here's what David says. You know David, don't you? David said, "God makes my way perfect." David perfect? I know a bunch of stuff on David. I know that the last half of the commandments, or the second table of the commandments that God gave Moses on Mount Sinai, David broke every one of them. Thou shalt not kill, he done that. Thou shalt not commit adultery, he done that. Thou shalt not steal, he done that. Thou shalt not covet, he did that. Name them. David wasn't perfect. And yet he says, God makes my way perfect. And so none of these right here are talking about somebody that has no faults and no errors. You and I know that there has never in the history of this world ever been but one person that ever walked on this earth that was perfect, and that was the Son of God himself, Jesus Christ. That's the only one that's ever been. Got a little news for you. Never will be another one neither. Never will be. I don't care how long the earth lasts. God had one Son. He called him his begotten Son, and that was him, and he was flawless, without sin, perfect in the way that we know perfect. 2 Chronicles chapter 15 verse 17 says, David, that King Asa's heart was perfect all his days. Well, it was total and it was complete. And it was all there in the sight of God, but he wasn't perfect either. And Job, you remember what was said about Job? As we start the book, Job chapter 1 and verse 1, God is telling the devil, Satan, that Job is a man that is perfect and upright. And Job was a great person. I love Job. I love what he stands for, but he wasn't perfect. He was complete. He was total. His wife said to him, curse God and die, and he wouldn't do it. That didn't make him perfect because he didn't do it perfect in the sense that we're talking about perfect. And here's Jesus saying this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48. He said, be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. I got no problem with God in heaven being perfect. Got no problem with that. I believe he is. And as much as me that can know, I do know that God is perfect. But he wants me to be perfect too. Be perfect, he says. And we know that we'll never attain perfection while we're here on this earth. The closest that we can get to it is the body that Christ and God, his Father, puts us in once we become members of his church. That is to be in his church, and that's as close to perfection as we're going to get, never as individuals. And so that sort of prompts a question this morning about the perfect church. Notice what Greg read to us a little bit earlier, because what he said to us in Ephesians chapter 5 was this. And there's one verse there that I thought was ought to mean more to us than anything else. Ephesians chapter 5, beginning with verse 23. I'm on the wrong one. Where am I? Here I am. He says that he might present it to himself, speaking of the church, to God, to Christ, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be, or as the version he read from, she, the church, should be holy and without blemish. Now that's how I think of perfect. When I think of perfect, that's what I think of. And so that says the perfect church, or maybe I should put a question mark at the end of that. Is this church perfect? And so there can be a discussion that happens this morning. Somebody asks you, do you go to church at Mount Zion? Yeah. Is that church perfect? Your probable first inclination would be, no, it ain't perfect. It's a good church, and I sure like going there, and I like being a part of it, but it's not perfect. And it shows our reluctance because we do not understand what perfection means. It shows our reluctance to answer a person in that way. We're reluctant to call ourselves saints. You notice that? How many times does Paul write and he'd say, to the saints at, and over he addresses the saints, and he's talking about members of the church. He's talking to Christians at some location, and yet we will deny being a saint. Ask me about myself, and you say, David, are you a saint? And I wouldn't even tell you, probably in our most intimate conversation, I'm even close to being a saint. Because I know that people say, well, if you say you're a saint, that means you're perfect. And we misunderstand what perfect means. But if we are Christians, we are saints. And we're reluctant to have it said about us that we are perfect. And so now when it comes down to the church itself, because we're Christians and we're imperfect and we're the people that make up the church, how can the church be perfect? We're not. And can the church be perfect? And I'm here to tell you this morning unequivocally that the church is perfect. It is complete, it is entire, it is whole, and God has given through His Son Jesus Christ to us through the church everything that the church is and everything the church needs to be. That's perfection. Doesn't mean that those of us who make it up never sin, never fail, never fall short. Don't get that idea. That's not what we're preaching this morning. The church is perfect. How could it possibly be? Well, in the first place, the church is perfect because it's got a perfect head. Now, I know there are some people that say, well, we've got a man in Rome, Italy, over there in the Vatican, and he's the head of the church here on this earth. I know that I've talked to many people that say that the Pope is the head of the church. First thing that I want to bring to your attention this morning, according to the Bible, he's not the head of the church. Not a word in the Bible about the Pope. But the reason that I know this is because in Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 22, the Bible tells us that Christ is the head of the church. Not was, not will be, but Christ is. Christ is now because Christ is not dead. Some people say, well, the Pope's taking his place because Christ is dead. Christ is not dead. Christ is alive, and he sits at the right hand of his Father, the throne of God. Christ is very much alive, and he is still the head of the church, and he's perfect. Pope ain't perfect. Pope ain't perfect. They say, the Pope's infallible. Well, we've seen a number of decisions that the present Pope has made that shows that he's not infallible, and he's not the only infallible Pope that's ever been. Christ is infallible, and he is the head of his church. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 22. So the church has got a perfect head. You couldn't ask for him better than Christ. That's the best there is. And I'm glad to be a part of the church that's got a perfect head, because we know that there's not going to be some decision passed down from some hierarchy that's going to change the nature and the value of the church, because we've got a perfect head. The church is perfect because it's got a perfect law. It's got a perfect law. Church got a perfect law. I didn't think any law was perfect. If you ever watch Channel 13, you'll notice on Channel 13 that when it comes on early of a morning until it goes off about, 7 o'clock, that about 90% of their people that buys time is lawyers. You ever notice that? If it wasn't lawyers buying time, I don't know, I believe it'd go bankrupt. And I noticed that in the offices of some of these lawyers, that you see these shelves up there and all these books and books and books, and I think, what's all these books? Well, they're law books. Law. Go sue somebody. Sue somebody. That's what they're saying. That's the message, isn't it? Sue somebody. Get some money out of this. Law. Book after book. We just got one book. And it's perfect. Right here, you've got it. The law of the church is right here in this one book. Don't need anything else. Now, there's other churches and there's other people that says, no, this is a good book and it's fine, but you need other things to go. You need some bylaws to go with it. And you need some man-written things to go with it. And I think to myself, how could it be that we need something else when we've got what's perfect? We've got the perfect law of Christ. Well, how do we know that? I get it out of the law book. That's where I got my answer to it. And the law says in James chapter 1, verse 25, that it's a perfect law. We got the perfect law. Now, the Jews thought that the law of Moses was perfect, but it wasn't perfect because the Hebrew writer said it was done away with because it wasn't perfect. It was a good law, and it was a written law that nobody else had, and it was a good law, and it was good for 1,500 years, but it was taken away because it wasn't perfect. And so God sent us something that's perfect. So we got the perfect law. That's what helps make the perfect church. And it can't be changed. Now, see what we do. We change Supreme Court justices. We change them. And some of them looks at the law and they look at the Constitution, they say, this needs to be changed. And then others say, no, it needs to be left alone. There's always a constant war that's going on about what the law is going to be. But this law has not changed. We've still got the same law that God gave us 2,000 years ago, and it's perfect. No, we didn't need to change something that's perfect. And in Acts chapter 4 and verse 11, we find out that Christ is the perfect foundation for the church. Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. That's what he built it on. And it's perfect foundation. You cannot have a perfect building if you don't build it on a perfect foundation. And it was built upon the foundation that Christ provided for us. Quickly, the perfect church has a perfect government. It has a perfect fellowship. We left this one out, but we have perfect fellowship. Acts chapter 2 and verse 42 tells us that they had a fellowship immediately after the first gospel sermon was preached on the day of Pentecost. They had a fellowship right then. We've got a perfect fellowship in the church. Not any other organization in the world that even comes close to that fellowship, which brings us to the next point, and that is that we have a perfect government. Well, how do we know this? Well, let's look at 1 Peter chapter 5. You may look if you would like. 1 Peter chapter 5, and here's what Peter tells us, beginning with verse 1. The elders which are among you I exhort, who am also an elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and shall a partaker also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you. We're talking about government. Taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint. He's telling us, elders, fellow elders, he's telling us how to do this perfectly. Taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, not willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, you shall receive a crown of glory that fades not away. He tells us how to do it perfectly. Now, a lot of churches don't have elders because evidently somebody back some years ago said, well, that's not the perfect way to govern a church. But it was the way God chose to govern a church was through elders, and it's through a local eldership, and we do not have a synod or a convention or some other hierarchy in the church. The highest that you can get here on this earth is a local congregation because that's what the law is. That's the law. And we find out here how elders are supposed to act and what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do, and it's perfect. It's perfect. The pastor is not the leader, singular, of the church. God has ordained elders to be the leader of the church, and he tells the elders what to do and not to do, and it's perfect. That don't mean you got elders that are flawless. Mount Zion's got 3 of them, ain't none of the 3 flawless or without fault. And that's not what perfect is. But God's plan for the church is to have a perfect government. That's what he's got in the way that he set it up. Church is perfect in its financial system. A lot of people don't think that it is, but it is. Because he tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, how this financial system's supposed to work. Tells us how it's to be done. Now, a lot of people don't go with that. This one tells us here that we are to give, that we are to set aside, and that we are to specify that on the first day of the week, that we are obligated to finance the church through what we give from the heart, and we put it in here, and this is the way the church runs. A lot of people say, well, it's okay, ain't nothing wrong with doing that, but ain't nothing wrong with having a garage sale either. Not anything in Corinthians about a garage sale, not anything there in 2 Corinthians about a yard sale. There's not anything about some other means or some other way that we are to finance the church. Why? Because this way's perfect. That's why. It's complete, it's total, it's whole, that's all you need. And so any other way is unauthorized and is not according to the Word of God. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 21 through 25, we find out that Christ is a perfect example for us. How should I live? What does God want from me? Who do I look to know whether I'm doing right or wrong? And the Bible teaches me in these 4 verses right here. He said, look at Christ. See what Christ did? Do what he did. Act like he acted. Now you know what an example really is. And he was the perfect example, the complete, the total example, everything that we need to know about how we need to conduct our lives here on this earth, we can take from him, because there never has been an example, even remotely close to what Jesus provided for us. And that brings us to sacrifice. And I'm afraid sometimes that we don't even understand what sacrifice really means. According to Acts chapter 20 and verse 28, we're taught there what an example is. And we understand what that sacrifice is, that Jesus gave himself. Not only gave him his life here on this earth, but he gave it ultimately on the cross and shed his blood as a sacrifice that is so far above what the Hebrew writer said in chapter 10 and verse 4. He said the blood of bulls and goats could never take away sin. That was a sacrifice, but it's not even remotely close. Christ was a perfect sacrifice. The reason that we're not offering the blood of bulls and goats this morning for sacrifice because it wasn't perfect. And yet Jesus' sacrifice was, he said, concerning the Lord's Supper, he said, every time that you do this, you think of me. Do this in remembrance of me. That's the perfect sacrifice, and that's the example that he set for us. Acts chapter 20 and verse 28. And then we got a perfect worship. A perfect worship? Are we worshiping perfectly this? We're worshiping perfectly this morning if we worship according to what the Bible tells us to do. Well, what does the Bible tell us to do? It tells us, first of all, that we are to sing. And if we sing like we sung this morning, by the way, we had a real good singing service this morning. Thank you, Gabe, for that. If we do that, and if we do it from the heart like God wants to, it's perfect. Never mind that somebody back there was a little off key this morning. Don't worry about somebody being off key. If it's coming from the heart, that's where it's supposed to come from. We're not here to satisfy people. That's not what we're come for. We're not here for somebody to go away and say, oh, Mount Zion's got the best singing there ever was. I'm always glad to hear that. But we're not here to satisfy ourselves. We're here to satisfy God. And if we're singing and we're doing it like we're supposed to, it's perfect and it's complete. And then we are to pray. And if that prayer is coming from the heart, not like those Pharisees that Jesus condemned for the way that they prayed, if we're praying from the heart, it's perfect prayer. It don't get any better than this. If we're giving the way that we give, if we take the Lord's Supper the way now you ain't gonna hear no perfect sermon this morning. This sermon is far from perfect. And it's far from complete, even from that. But for this little bit this morning, I want you to think about the worship that we are offering up to God. Sometimes we don't understand perfection because we just don't understand it. Some people don't understand the gospel because they don't have a perfect understanding. Do you have a perfect understanding of the gospel? Who among us would say, our understanding is perfect? God gives us perfection after we continue. Look at how many things in life that don't stop us because we don't understand it all. We don't stop watching TV because we don't understand how it works. I would never again have to turn my TV on if I waited for that. I do not understand it. I don't know how. Brandon, maybe you understand it. Jerry, you might understand it. I do not understand how it works. I don't know how that they can make pictures in Washington, D.C., and audio and video and send them 1,000 miles away to Richardsville, Kentucky, and it comes in a little box in my house and I can see. I don't know how that works, but that don't keep me from doing it. I still do it. I don't understand how electricity works. I'm not an electrician. There's a whole lot about an engine that I don't know. I just called somebody that does, that understands it better. I farmed all my life, and I can't really tell you what is happening in the ground when you put fertilizer on it. I went to school at Western and majored in agriculture, and I did not understand all that I was taught about that. I know it works, and I still do it because I know it works. I ain't going to quit eating because I don't understand biology. I do not understand how eating keeps I burn calories and that gives me energy and I can keep going until I eat. I don't understand how it works, but they ain't going to keep me from eating. And it ain't you either. There's a lot of things that we don't understand. We don't understand all these things that we've talked about church this morning. But God makes us complete. God is what makes us perfect. We'll never attain it ourselves. The church will never attain perfection so far as the church is concerned, but we give it to God and God makes it perfect. He finishes out the church the rest of the way. God understands our lack and He finishes it for us. There's a lot that we don't know. That's okay with God. We keep learning, we keep studying, and that is where we come to perfection. That is where we come to completeness. A few years ago, and I want to finish with this morning. A few years ago, 1988 as a matter of fact, they had the Olympics. And the Olympics, so they tell me, is very, very competitive. And I think all of us know that. Very, very competitive. Country against country, but people against people. And they were having a marathon, a race. And there was a little boy that ran out on the field. They said he was 7 years old. And he shouldn't have done that, but he did. He ran out there and he started running with the rest of them. And they just kept going and nobody went and got him, and no parents or nothing went after him, and he just kept running with these Olympians. And they ran off and left him, and they crossed the finish line, and he wasn't there yet, but the little fellow was still trying, and he fell down just before he got there. And some of those Olympians turned around and went back and got that little guy, and they picked him up, and they said, "Move those feet." And they carried him running across the finish line. And that was a perfect race. That's perfect. It was complete. Now we understand what perfection really is. It's completeness. Be a complete Christian. Mount Zion needs to be a complete church. Are we working in the direction that God would have us to go? If you're here this morning and you're not part of this church, and you need to be, if you're here this morning and you've never been baptized for remission of sins, I'll tell you this morning, you're not going to be complete until you do. You're not a Christian yet. You need to be a Christian. You need, and that completes your obedience to Him when you're baptized for remission of sins. And God takes you and He puts you in a perfect place, and that's the church. Acts chapter 2, verse 42, again in verse 47, He puts you in a perfect place. That's where He wants you. Maybe you've done that, as Steve mentioned in his prayer this morning. Maybe you've done that, but for some reason you thought, I can't be perfect, and maybe I just need to get out of the way. Some people have done that, and you got out of the way, all right, out of the way. You need to get back in the way. If you're here this morning, there's anything that we can do in order to help you, I hope that you'll make that move, that you'll strive for perfection this morning. While we stand, okay, while we sing.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing cloud? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you walking daily by the Savior's side? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Do you rest each moment in the crucified? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Lay aside the garments that are stained with sin, and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean. Oh, be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
The Carolinas, the Lord's Supper this morning, sing the first and last verse, page 633. When I survey the wondrous cross, on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss, and for the consider the following for the second Trinity judgment from the table. Lord, please bless this loaf as a privilege of God in the house of God.
Dear Heavenly Father, we want to come back to you again, thanking you for all the blessings that you have given us. Let us at this time give back a portion of those blessings which we have presented to these. Thank you for your Son who died on the cross, and it's in his name we pray. Amen. Close this morning with the first and last verse, page 619. After this song by Greg Barrett, please turn to the Spirit. Psalm sing. Of we that love the Lord, and let our joy be known. Join in a song with sweet accord. Join in a song with sweet accord. And us around the throne, and us around the throne. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God. Then let our songs abound, and every tear be dried. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground to where worlds on high, to where worlds on high. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upward to Zion, the beautiful city of God.
Dear Heavenly Father, we once again thank you for this opportunity to be here today to assemble in your name, sing these songs of praise to you, study portions of your word, Lord. We're grateful for those that are visiting here today, Lord. We pray that you will allow them to return to us if they pray to be removed, Lord. We're thankful for those who are returning from illness to be with us here today, and we pray continual prayers for those who are unable to be here. We also ask that you bless those who are possibly mourning the losses of loved ones. Pray that you will always be with us here at Mount Zion, be with the church. We are grateful for the lesson today that was presented here today. We pray that we understand that we strive to be as you are, to be like you and your Son, but to know that we are not perfect, but through you we can be perfect, Lord. Thank you for blessing us in so many ways. Pray that you will be with each of us here today as we depart, go into our separate ways. Pray that you will always bring us back at the next point in time. Thank you for your son, all that he is, the life that he lived, the lessons that he taught us, and ultimately that sacrifice on the cross he made for the forgiveness of our sins. Pray that we'll always remember that and be grateful. And it's in his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.